Okay guys, here it is, the long-awaited new astrophotography cooled camera from ZWO that includes the IMX585 sensor, but it is the monochrome version of that sensor. I have it in my hand. This is the ZWO ASI585MM PRO from monochrome camera, and there we have it. So this is a usual type of camera from ZWO, but if you're new to astrophotography, you might not be familiar with everything. Basically, this camera is a camera that is cooled. That's why it has all of those fins and a fan inside that can spin, and it will cool the sensor down up to 35 degrees Celsius below ambient. So if the ambient temperature is 20 degrees Celsius, it can cool to minus 15 degrees Celsius in terms of absolute value, and you can just set, which target temperature you want the camera to cool to and keep there, basically. And that allows us to avoid a lot of noise on the sensor. We get a much less noise in our image, which is great because we have to take long exposures when we're doing astrophotography, and cooled astrophotography cameras help a lot with that. And then we have the second thing is that the sensor that's inside this camera is the 585 monochrome sensor. So that means that if I take a picture with that, whether of a terrestrial object or of a nebula, galaxy, etc., the image is going to be monochrome. So if I want to get a color image out of this, I need to use filters like red filter, then green filter, then blue filter. So I have three images. I can put them on top of one another, and poof, I get color images. And the big advantage of that is that for the same amount of imaging time, due to the way that monochrome versus color sensors work, if I spend the same amount of time taking images of a galaxy, a nebula, of a given target with a monochrome sensor, I will get better signal-to-noise ratio, so a better quality image, really, than with a color sensor for the same amount of time spent, as long as we spend the time wisely, but that is another topic. And cameras like this with the 585 sensor, because the sensor is so small and so cheap, can be great for newcomers to astrophotography who are interested in monochrome astrophotography. So when you buy this camera, the monochrome version is currently $699 US. So we're talking about $700 US. And this is compared to other offerings like the Minicam 8 from QHY with the same sensor and the same cooling capability. There's the ATR 8 monochrome by Tech with the same sensor and better cooling capabilities. And they're both in the same price range, except that they both offer a combo setting that comes with all of the filters you need to take color images with a monochrome camera. And the total cost is something like $900 US. Whereas with this, you would need to buy a separate filter wheel and separate filters. There are no bundles from ZWO that I am aware of. So just so you know. So what is the advantage of this red camera compared to the other two cameras that I've mentioned? Well, it's ZWO, meaning that it works with the ZWO ASI Air. And if you're a beginner in astrophotography, it's probably the best control center there is for a complete beginner. Although my heart goes to other control centers like Nina, but that is just me. So anyway, you end up with this camera, and on the outside, it looks pretty much like any other ZWO camera. We have the front of the camera with the camera sensor. With the default ring that is there, you have a distance of 17.5 millimeters between the flange of that ring and the camera sensor itself. The camera comes with adapters to let you get exactly 55 millimeters of distance between the back of your telescope and the camera sensor, and most telescopes require exactly such a distance. So here it's provided, and you can replace one of those elements with a filter wheel, another one of these elements with like an off-axis guider, and you'll still be at 55 millimeters. So it's all well designed and getting really well standardized these days, which is really, really good. And on top of that, I can remove that ring, and then I'm left with male M42 threads here, and the distance between the flange of the camera itself and the sensor in that case is, I believe, 6.5 millimeters. So you can accommodate when you have like Lenses, like camera lenses, are a good example of that. But they cannot work with just 55 millimeters. They have to have like 44 millimeters, and that can help with that. So that's typical of the ZWO cameras that are somewhat small sensors, so micro four thirds and below. And then at the back, also typical of ZWO cameras, we have the usual stuff with the main USB 3 port, so that you can connect your camera to your PC or to your ASI Air. Or to your Stella Vita, or to your Stella Mate Pro, that orange thing that I have there. And you also have a 12 volt input port, so you should provide 12 volt 3 amps to that port. The camera does not come with any power brick for that, but this is the standard voltage that you need for your astrophotography accessories. If you don't have the 12 volt input, the camera will not work, even without cooling. So just something to keep in mind. And then we have the always very convenient USB output ports there. So this is basically a USB hub that allows you to plug two things as USB 2 from the back of the camera. Typically, I would use them for one for the filter wheel, because we need a filter wheel to take color images with this, and then the second one with a focuser, like this thing here, which is one of an electric focuser, and then I can control both by simply plugging in the camera, and then I also have, by doing so, plugged in both the focuser and a filter wheel. In the box, I already showed we have a nice little case that comes with the camera. As usual, we have the adapters to get 55 millimeters of back focus. We have the ZWO USB 3 cable that you can use as is. We have a nose piece adapter if you want to basically insert the camera into a telescope. Usually it's like for things like planetary imaging, which, by the way, the 585 sensor should be pretty good at. And then we have two USB 2 cables, which are made exactly for what I mentioned earlier. They're short cables, something like 30 to 50 centimeters long, and they're made to go with that USB hub there, so that you can connect your focuser and your filter wheel. So usual accessories with ZWO cameras, you get the complete package. Now, in terms of the features of this camera, I've already mentioned that it is a cooled astrophotography camera. So yes, it can cool 35 degrees below ambient. I actually tried it in a temperature controlled room where I had set the temperature to 20 degrees Celsius, and I was able to reach minus 14 degrees Celsius, so not quite 35 degrees below ambient, but close enough. So the cooler works exactly as expected. As usual with ZWO cameras, the cooler is very gradual in how it works. So you'll have to wait for 5 minutes or so before the cooling is at maximum performance and reaches your target. This is in contrast with like Toptech cameras that are programmed to be extremely aggressive with the cooling, and typically I reach my target temperature in like 20 seconds. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not a big deal whatsoever. Oh, and by the way, we get some other adapters there, like there's an M42 to M48, something like that, I'm not sure, ring adapter. We have a C format adapter as well, if you want to use C formatted lenses with this camera. And then we have small tiny spacers that are fractions of a millimeter each in there that let you really adjust your back focus, but also if you're screwing things together, you can adjust the relative angle that they end up screwed in to using this kind of spacer. So it's nice to have all of that in the box. It's as usual with ZWO, but it's good to have like the whole package except for something like a power brick. Now, in terms of the way that this camera works, I will go into details on the specs themselves, but if you've watched my review of the ZWO ASI585MM PRO camera, which is the same camera but in a color version, you could actually watch this video and replace every time I say one-shot color or its abbreviation OSC or color, if you replace that with the word monochrome, it's basically the same thing. It is very much the exact same camera as the ASI 585MC PRO. I mean, here are the two of them next to one another. Can you tell which is which? But it's not just the exterior appearance, it's actually the actual gain control, the gain at which it switches from low conversion gain to high conversion gain. It's exactly the same. Everything about those cameras is basically the same between the color version and the monochrome version, except that the monochrome version is monochrome. So for my tests, I used this camera with this little telescope there. This is a Newtonian telescope with an aperture of 150 millimeters and a focal ratio of f3.8, the Carbon Star 150 from Apertura, which I reviewed on the channel before. And basically for me to install it, it's very easy. As usual, I can unscrew this camera, which is the Taupe Tech with the 585 color sensor. And I just put in the ZWO camera because they share the same back focus. It will just work as is. I don't need to do anything. And I just need to switch my filters because I don't have a filter wheel on this particular piece of equipment. And then I can use the USB hub exactly as before. My power input. And my USB cable. USB 3 cable, that's it. I'm ready to image. That's the extent of the effort that I needed. And I have a telescope that uses both a ZWO guide camera and a ZWO main camera. Of course, I have also analyzed the sensor itself via SharpCap, so we can have a look at the results together. And I also go through the specifications, the advantages and disadvantages of the sensor with the field of views that you can get with various telescopes. And I'll show you the result of an imaging session, which I intentionally took only with the lumens filter because that gives you, I wanted to take like a detailed, just black and white image of a galaxy. I chose the UFO galaxy, and so we'll have a look at how that looks like together with the 585mm Pro camera. But you know, I know this sensor works well. I've already used this, the color version of the sensor for a long time, for a year, something like that. It works excellently, and I've already used monochrome versions of this sensor with the Minicam 8 and the ATR 585M cameras, and they both work great. So I knew what I was getting into, and there was no reason for me to get bad results. That said, because I imaged a galaxy, I went with a broadband lumens filter here, which means that I did not use gain 252, where the high conversion gain kicks in. I used gain 0 for that because I'm in Tokyo. It's a very light polluted city, and even when I have high read noise, it doesn't really matter. And I took, I believe, 60-second long exposures for that. And I managed to take only like around 2 hours of data. I don't quite remember. I'll show you the results as well as the number of hours once inside to show you like the sensor analysis, all the specs, pros and cons, etc. Let's get going. Before that, if you want to support the channel, you can click the like button on this video. It really helps out. And you can also leave a comment. Let us know what you think of this ZWO ASI585MM PRO camera compared to other offerings on the market. Would you recommend something else? Do you have it? Do you like it? Would you want to buy it, etc.? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. And if you want to support the channel even more, and you're planning on buying anything from Agena, High Point Scientific, First Light Optics, etc., if you do so after clicking one of the links that I have down in the description, it will help me out at no cost to you. So that's an easy way to support the channel. Of course, if you want to sponsor this channel directly and sponsor the work, because it's a lot of work to test all of that stuff and to make all of those videos, you can become a channel member. It's the join button next to the subscribe button. Or you can become a Patreon supporter. I have the link down in the description. You guys, you know it. Channel members, Patreon supporters, you make this channel possible. I said every time, you guys are amazing. Thank you so much for your generosity. Okay, with that, let's get inside and see exactly what this camera is capable of. Okay, we're inside and we can look at what this camera is capable of. Let's start with looking at the field of views that you can achieve with this small sensor. And this is something that I've covered in the past, but let's have another look so you know what we can do with this. And let me start you with like a small galaxy. Let's say the Pinwheel Galaxy M101. And you can see we have in yellow, this is the field of view that you would get with a small refractor telescope, something like the SQA55. The Red Cat 51 would be very similar. The SV555 would be slightly larger, but very similar. This is the kind of field of view that you would get. And you can see the galaxy itself would be a little bit small in there, but definitely workable. And you get 2.3 arc seconds per pixel, roughly, which is, you know, undersampled, meaning you're not capturing as much detail as you could possibly for this particular object or for this, for your setup, but it's not like the end of the world. It's fine, and you can get good results. And this is possible because of the small pixels of the 585 sensor. They're 2.9 microns compared to the larger pixels of something like the IMX533 sensor or the IMX571 sensor, which are 3.76 microns, and therefore they can capture fewer details than what we have here. And that's what's one of the things that I love with this camera. And then if you're using a larger telescope, but still not an insane focal length, something like 800 millimeters, you'd be getting the red square here. And that's with an example of a Newtonian telescope, the R200 SS, which I used to own. Excellent telescope. And we can see that the galaxy there fits perfectly in this field of view. And when you go with 800 millimeters, in that case, you have 0.75 arc seconds per pixel, which is a great sampling for pretty much any seeing conditions. Might be even oversampled for some seeing conditions. So I think it's a real Goldilocks type of pixel size, but in terms of sensor size, it is a bit small. And you can see that by looking at something like the Andromeda galaxy, which is a much larger target. And you can see that if I use a focal length of 800 millimeters, then I cannot frame the galaxy. I'll see only the core. It's not ideal. But if I go with a small refractor, something like the ZWO ASI585, then I have a field of view that if I rotate it, I should be able to frame almost the entire galaxy. So if you go with a small sensor like the 585, you would want to be able to buy a small refractor, something like the ZWO ASI555, something like the SV555, or something like the Rokinon/Samyang 135 millimeter lens. Then you get a really wide field of view, even with a tiny sensor. And the good thing is those kind of lenses/telescopes, they're fairly cheap. They can be found secondhand as well in a lot of time. And so it's like, I think it's a Goldilocks type of sensor. Even though it's so small, just adapt the optics to take into account the size of that sensor. And you can do so because if you have like a long focal length telescope, buying a short focal length telescope is much less expensive. So yeah, it's something to keep in mind about the field of view of this particular camera. And I talked a bit about the pixel size of 2.9 microns, which is really good in my opinion, but there's some other specs that I like. I like the resolution, which is roughly 4000 per 2000 pixels, and that's again Goldilocks. You can have a very underpowered PC and still be able to drive that camera with no issues. You can also stack very easily, even with lots of frames. Kind of a Goldilocks type of thing, especially if you're a beginner in astrophotography. And another thing that's really good is the quantum efficiency. The quantum efficiency is basically, if you see 91%, it means that when a photon hits one of the pixels on your sensor, it has a 91% chance of being converted into an electron. So it's basically how efficiently are we able to count photons that fall into the sensor. And 91% is a very high figure. If we go into the detailed specs themselves, and I look at the quantum efficiency for that sensor, you can see that for the visible spectrum, which is from 400 nanometer wavelengths to roughly 700 nanometer wavelengths, we're always above 75%, and a lot of the time, almost for half of it, above 90%. So that's very, very impressive. And it is actually better than very widespread sensors like the 533, which is in the ASI533 MC and MM Pro, or the 571, which is in the 2600 mm MC Pro, or even the very large sensors in something like the 6200 mm/MC Pro. This is very, very good quantum efficiency, especially when you look at oxygen 3, which would be around here, which is very important for nebulae, and it's above 90%, it's roughly 91%. Or if you look at H alpha, which is around here, you're above 80%. That's excellent and much, much better than the 533 or 571 sensors. And even for sulfur 2, which is roughly around there, you'd see something like 75, a bit above 75%, This is also very, very good. And that's a very good quality of this sensor. I kind of wish there was an APS-C size version of exactly the same sensor. Going back to the main specs, by the way, a lot of people would complain that the ADC is 12-bit. In my opinion, it doesn't really matter because it's taken into account to the dynamic range. And the dynamic range is what we should be looking at. Like the ADC plus the gain plus the full well depth gives you, plus the read noise gives you your dynamic range, and that's what we're going to look at now. These are the specs that you can get with this particular sensor. And what's very interesting with that is at most you get 12.5 stops of dynamic range. And as you increase your gain, because the x-axis is the gain of the camera, as you increase the gain, you lose dynamic range, and suddenly, pop, you recover dynamic range to 11 stops. And this is the point where the camera actually switches from low conversion gain to high conversion gain. And what that does is that it reduces the read noise a lot, although the full well depth is still diminishing for the camera throughout the range. That means that even though your full well depth is diminishing, by having much lower read noise, you get much better dynamic range suddenly. So that's why we go back to 11 stops. And my personal thought about this switch from low conversion gain to high conversion gain on the ZWO versions of this sensor cameras is that it's too late. It's slightly for too high value of gain. I wish they had put this switch at like gain 150 maybe. And then we'd probably get something like 11.5 in terms of dynamic range, with maybe a read noise of 1.5, something like that. And I think that would be a much better compromise. And this is something that I've said for the color version of this ASI camera as well. So that's kind of like a little drawback. And what this means is that unlike the 571 sensor, or unlike the 533 sensor in the ZWO world, so the 2600 MC/mm Pro, the 533 MC/mm Pro cameras, for instance, where I could tell you like pretty much all the time you want to image at gain 100, this is not the case here. Here you need to be a bit smart about what gain you choose. So for instance, if you're in a very dark zone, like you see a lot of stars, you're Bortle 1, Bortle 2, Bortle 3, maybe even Bortle 4, then you probably want to privilege having low read noise. And in that case, definitely go for the high conversion gain and image at the gain of 252. Perfectly fine. If you're in a light polluted area like Tokyo, but you're using narrowband filters, at most 7 nanometer band passes, so 7 nanometer or tighter, then also you want to privilege small read noise, in which case you want to image at 252 to take advantage of the high conversion gain. But if you're in Tokyo, or let's say a Bortle 7, Bortle 8, Bortle 9, very light polluted area, and you're wanting to do broadband imaging, then your light pollution noise, the shot noise from the light pollution, will completely overwhelm any amount of read noise, regardless of how long your exposures are. So in that case, if you're going to go for broadband targets like galaxies, then you can image at gain 0. And that's what I did for my test with the UFO Galaxy with this camera. Just imaged at gain 0, because even with 6.5 electrons of read noise, with the insane amount of shot noise that I have from light pollution, it doesn't matter. And there's another case if you're like in Bortle 4, 5, 6, something like that, so kind of like suburban area in the United States, for instance, it might be better to lower a little bit the read noise. So you might want to go to something like 100 to 150 gain, maybe just to keep like 11 stops of dynamic range, you want to go to 125. That's probably what I would recommend in this case. You get roughly 4 electrons of read noise, which is manageable, and that would probably work well in such areas. So this is not like the 533 MC Pro or the 2600 or the 6200 MC/mm Pro cameras, where you can just say like gain 100 works pretty much all the time. Here you kind of need to look at your conditions and choose your gain wisely due to how this high conversion gain was selected. And by the way, looking at those specs, how well do they agree with my own camera that I tested with SharpCap? Let's have a look at what I got from measuring my camera sensor. And you can see that we get a big jump there in terms of read noise, those red crosses between 250 and 300 gain, which is exactly as per the specification. We can see that at gain 250, we see a read noise of 3.5, let's say, with a dynamic range of 9.3 stops. If I go there at 250, I get indeed 3.4 read noise with a dynamic range that has dipped to below 9.5 stops. That's exactly what I measured using SharpCap. And if I go to 300, suddenly I'm at a much lower read noise of 0.9 with a much better dynamic range thanks to that lower read noise of 10.4. And if we look at 300, then yes, indeed, we see a read noise of 0.9 and a dynamic range of, indeed, roughly 10.5, 10.4. So the specs look to be pretty much in line with what ZWO has published. We can look at another point, let's say gain 0. And gain 0, I see a read noise of 6.6 with a dynamic range of 12. This is something where we have a discrepancy on the stops of dynamic range. And it might be simply due to the fact that the camera ADC is 12-bit. But this is interesting. Otherwise, the read noise itself, 6.6 compared to something like 6.4, it's pretty much in line. So we can see that the specifications published by ZWO, this seem to be following very closely the real-world measurement. So this is very, very good. Okay, with that, we've looked a lot at the specifications. What about the results? Let's have a look at what I got in PixInsight. So I talked about the UFO galaxy, right? So I took 301 exposures of 60 seconds each at gain 0 with the ASI585MM PRO using a luminance filter. So this is a pure monochrome image, just to show you. And this is what I got by default. So we can see the UFO galaxy, which is a tiny galaxy. And it was taken with a 580 millimeters focal length telescope, the Apertura Carbon Star 150, which I've reviewed on the channel before. And it's actually a decent framing for even this tiny galaxy. Let's see what we can get from that. So first I cropped the image, then to remove like the stacking artifacts. Then I removed the background, and by the way, this is 2 times drizzling, so we can get as much details as possible. Then I applied a blur exterminator, so we get more detail in the core of the galaxy from before and after. Then, noise exterminator, as usual, before stretching. This is what we get after stretching. And then it's just a matter of removing the stars temporarily, doing some HDR multi-scale transform so we can really see the high contrast details at the core of the galaxy. And then, it's just about curves and playing with everything. And that's what we get before placing back the stars in the image. And this is what we get from Tokyo with just the luminance filter with this camera. So very light polluted area in broadband. But we still get a very good result, I would say, with just 5 hours of data. And the transparency during that night was actually terrible because we've had a lot of pollen these days and also sand from Mongolia flowing into Tokyo. So pretty decent result in my opinion, but I thought I can do better because I've taken images of the UFO galaxy with another scope whose review I will film and publish on this channel soon, so subscribe if you don't want to miss it. It's the SV503-102 refracting telescope, and I used the ASI2600 MC Air camera to capture a color image, and so I decided to take this channel here, the monochrome image that I got from the 585 sensor, and add it as a luminance layer to the color image that I got. And this is the result. This is actually the color image directly from the SV Boni telescope with the color camera. But you can see that it has colors but lacks details. However, if we look at our image monochrome, it lacks color but it has details. So we can take the best of both worlds, and with the best of both worlds, combining both images, this is what we get, the UFO galaxy from Tokyo. And I think it's a pretty good result. And this type of use case with the camera of, just taking luminance image and then mixing with a color version. Let's say you have two telescopes and you have the ASI585MC Pro on one telescope and the ASI585MM Pro on the other. You can use the MM Pro to get the monochrome data and get all of the details, and the MC Pro to get the color data and then merge them. That's actually probably one of the best setups you could have, like two SQF55s, for instance, with those cameras would be a lot of fun. So if you already have color cameras and several rigs, you're able to achieve that without needing any filter wheel or anything like that, and still make a very good use of the 585 monochrome camera as well. So this gives you a good idea, I think, of what is achievable with the camera. Again, I've already done reviews of monochrome cameras with the same sensor on the channel, and I've done review of the color version of that camera from ZWO. So there's really nothing new, but I still wanted to go through all of the details as much as possible. So if you watch my videos, it's probably been a little bit repetitive. I'm really sorry about that, but I hope that if you're new to the channel or even new to astrophotography, this has been interesting and helps you in your purchase decisions. In general, if you're a beginner, I recommend color cameras, but you can see that monochrome cameras can really pack a punch as well. Let me know what you think of this camera and the results that I got down in the comments. I love to see your comments. And also, while you're going there, you can like the video. It really helps the channel out. And if you want to help the channel even more at no cost to you, and you're planning on buying anything from ZWO, like this camera, or Agena, High Point Scientific, First Light Optics, etc., if you do so after clicking one of the links that I have in the description, it will help me out, again, at no cost to you. Of course, if you want to sponsor this channel directly and make these videos possible, you can become a channel member or you can become a Patreon supporter. The link is down in the description. Some of my Patreon ranks have access to my videos early and without ads. And you guys, Patreon supporters, channel members, I said it already in this video, thank you so much. You make all of this possible. With that, I hope this was useful. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, whenever you can, to look up at the stars, and I'll see you next time.